welcome you all to day two of the 2021 edition of the Energy and Resources Institute's annual flagship event, the World Sustainable Development Summit, being held virtually under the broad theme, Redefining Our Common Future, Safe and Secure Environment for All, from 10 to 12 February 2021. This edition of the WSDS marks 20 years of the platform, and it's a matter of great pride for us all at TERI that all of you are able to attend this important milestone edition. I would like to welcome you all to this plenary on developing a long-term vision for implementing One Sun, One World, One Grid, which seeks to facilitate global cooperation, build a global ecosystem of interconnected solar energy resources in a global platform that can be seamlessly shared. I'd like to start by calling Dr. Mathur, Director General TERI, to open the session.
Thank you very much, Juhi, and a very warm welcome to all our speakers as well as to all the participants in this plenary session on developing a long-term vision for implementing the One Sun, One World, One Grid approach. This is an approach that is quite central to the way we look at the future, to how we solarize the world, which is obviously one of the most important elements in our transition to a clean and affordable energy future. We see renewable energy, the installed capacity, and the production of solar electricity increasing over time. In India itself, whether you're looking at the potential of the deserts of Rajasthan or the cold deserts of Ladakh, the potentials are huge. The challenge is, if you produce so much renewable electricity at prices that are amazingly low, how do you use it all? And hence the approach, can we look at moving this electricity into neighboring geographies, taking advantage of the fact that the sun moves and therefore there are time zones. And therefore electricity produced in one time zone could be used in another time zone where at that point of time, it is difficult to generate solar electricity. That's the One Sun, One World, One Grid concept. And, when we looked at this with India as the fulcrum, you look at the Far East, Myanmar, Vietnam, Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, and the Far West, which is Middle East, North Africa, and so on. So if we could connect to these two geographies, it is possible that we could achieve the kind of balancing between the production and the utilization of solar energy while capturing the essence of the low cost that solar electricity provides. Now, this obviously has huge benefits, but it's also not easy. Apart from the geopolitical difficulties, there are also technical difficulties. And that is why the International Solar Alliance is starting off, and the World Bank is starting off with a study which is being carried out by EDF, and in which we, TERI, are proud partners of EDF. We will start off with the chairman of the Energy Transitions Commission, Lord Adair Turner, who I request him to provide us with a larger overview of the energy transition. We then move to Mr. Upendra Tripathi, the Director General of the International Solar Alliance, whom I will request to provide the keynote address and particularly providing us with an overview of his picture of the One World, of the One Sun, One World, One Grid approach. After that, we would move into a panel discussion, which would be chaired by Dr. Anshu Bhardwaj, the CEO of Shakti Solar, and would include representatives from the government of France, Ambassador Stephen Crozat, Amit Jain from the World Bank, Mr. Philip Leinhardt from EDF. He's the project lead for the OSOWOG project, and would also include Lord Adair Turner. So without further ado, let me request Adair Turner, the chairman of the Energy Transitions Commission, a former chair of the UK Financial Services Authority, a former Director General of the Confederation of British Industry. He was also interesting, he has had a long association with climate change. He headed UK's Climate Change Committee about a decade ago. And I can't think of anybody better than Adair to place into perspective the way we are looking at solar electricity in the energy transition to come. So, Adair, all yours.
Ajay, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be joining this virtual version of the WSDS. I wish I was there in person in Delhi in the February sunshine, sitting outside at the Habitat Centre. I think I first attended a WSDS with Terry probably 4 years ago, soon after Ajay and I became the co-chairs of the Energy Transition Commission. And it's interesting to reflect on the great progress since then, and indeed since the Paris COP21 at the end of 2015. That progress has been huge in India and across the world, increasing momentum of renewable energy deployment, big step forward in electric vehicle development, and an increasing number of countries and companies making commitments to be net zero. Developed countries increasingly saying they'll get to net zero by 2050, developing by 2060. And that progress reflects a confidence that we now know how to build zero carbon economies. And that confidence has essentially come because of huge technological and cost progress. The cost of onshore and offshore wind down by 60, 70, even 75% in 10 years. Solar even more dramatic, costs down by 90% in just 10 years, battery costs down at 85%. And we now know far more clearly than we did 5 or 10 years ago what is the way to a zero carbon economy. It is essentially deep electrification of the economy plus a role of hydrogen as an electricity carrier. In April, the Energy Transition Commission is going to issue 2 parallel reports, one on the global electricity system, the other on hydrogen. We see a world in which electricity will have to go from about 20% of final energy demand today to over 60%, with another 10 to 15% of final energy demand coming from hydrogen, primarily made via electrolysis. That implies total hydrogen production going from 70 to 700 million tons, and in total, electricity production across the world going from 27,000 to something like 100,000 terawatt hours. With even developed countries like the UK increasing our electricity use 2.5 or 3 times, developing countries like India increasing electricity use 5 or 6 times, and emerging economies like Africa increasing it 10 or 15 times. And there are huge potential benefits. An electrified economy is essentially a more efficient economy, and the benefits in terms of local air quality will be huge as well. Once we've got there, it will be even nicer to sit in the February sunshine at the Habitat Centre. The good news is that it's absolutely possible. The resources exist. The sun shines down on Earth each day 8,000 times as much solar energy as required to produce 100,000 terawatt hours of electricity. And if we got all of that electricity from solar, we wouldn't, but if we did, we would only have to cover about 1 to 1.5% of the land area of the world in solar panels to produce all the electricity we need. Indeed, our work in India, which ETC has done through Terry, suggests that there is enough land in India, despite it being a relatively high population country, to support that dramatic reduction in electricity production to over 6,000 terawatt hours by 2050. The challenge is no longer how we produce cheap renewable electricity. Let's be clear, the cheapest way to produce electricity now is not coal, it is wind or solar. Our key challenge now is two categories of problem. What to do about very high population countries, density countries. Let's take Bangladesh. You could not provide all of Bangladesh's electricity from solar panels without covering something like 6 or 7% of the land area in solar panels, and that is too much. Or Singapore, 8,000 people per square kilometre, absolutely impossible for them to be self-sufficient in renewables. So that's problem one. And the second problem is how to balance electricity systems when you produce much of your electricity from wind or solar. What to do when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow. But at the ETC, we are increasingly convinced that there are answers to that. In a country like India, where the balance problem is primarily diurnal, day to night, there will be a very major role for batteries. And we saw earlier last year, in the middle of last year, the extraordinary round-the-clock renewables auction in India, producing round-the-clock renewables with wind and solar plus batteries at just 2.9 rupees per kilowatt hour. In Northwest Europe, the balancing problems are a bit more challenging because we have to deal with these large winter heating peaks. But there are technological answers there as well, including using hydrogen as a storage device. But it is also clear that one of the key answers to these balancing problems, as well as to the high population density problems, is very wide area interconnection of our electricity systems. And that is why the Energy Transition Commission is increasingly interested in the options of very long distance transmission, which we will be discussing in our forthcoming power report. There are multiple very long distance links now under discussion across the world. There is the Australia to Singapore Sunlink project. There is a discussion of an X-Link project from Morocco to the UK. Within China, of course, even internally, there are huge long-distance HVDC lines being produced. And here in India, there is the idea of one sun, one world, one grid, the potential to link India through to the Middle East and to Southeast Asia. Obviously, the key is the costs of transmission per kilowatt hour per distance. And interestingly, these hugely vary with specific circumstance. It's not so much the engineering cost that varies, but the relative costs of doing long distance transmission lines overground or underground or undersea. And the issues are often to do with land acquisition and disputes. It's much more expensive, for instance, to put a long distance transmission line through Germany than it is across America or across China or across any desert region. But one of the really interesting ones is undersea cabling, which can be a cheaper solution. We are looking at costs which are certainly below 1 cent per kilowatt hour per 1,000 kilometers, but we think in many possibilities we will be able to get that down below 0.5 of a cent per kilowatt hour per 1,000 kilometers. And once you get those sort of costs, links of 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 kilometers become real possibilities. Of course, there are major challenges. And in a sense, the biggest challenges here are not the engineering and the cost. They are about getting global agreement and international agreement. If you asked somebody who knew nothing about the politics of South Asia to look at the map and ask where they would put links, they would probably say, why don't we link India with Pakistan, with Afghanistan, with Iran, and with the Middle East? But you only have to say that to realize that there are some complexities in the political process here, as well as the engineering. But the prize is so big for the world of being able to interconnect these solar resources and unleash cheap, round-the-clock solar energy that we have to find a way as a world of creating the possibilities of international agreement to seize this huge potential for mankind. I look forward to the discussion on the panel.
Thank you very much, Adair. I think by putting the problem in perspective, you've done us all great help in looking at both the benefit side as well as the challenges side. Thank you very much. I now call on Mr. Upendra Tripathi, the Director General of the International Solar Alliance, in fact, the founder Director General of the International Solar Alliance, to share his thoughts on what is it that the Solar Alliance looks at when it looks at the One Sun, One World, One Grid approach. Mr. Tripathi has led the the renewable energy program in India. He was instrumental in bringing together the various agencies that helped India create the 90 gigawatts of solar of renewable energy, renewable electricity that it has today, and converted the Solar Energy Corporation of India into the powerhouse that is there today. So without further ado, Mr. Tripathi.
Thank you, Ajay, and thank you, Lord Turner. You spoke so well, and in fact, I'll go back to 2014 when I just happened to be the Secretary of Ministry of New and Renewable Energy. We used to go to the Ministry of Power, and we used to call one ministry called Ministry of Ties, when the investors would come and like to invest more in the power ministry. And the other was the Ministry of Dhotis, where you use khadi, and come. And we used to go to the ministry to request for 5 megawatt, 10 megawatt, 20 megawatt of thermal power, so that we bundle it with solar energy and bring down the cost so that we can sell or promote solar energy. That was 2014. And today it's the other way around. I find that companies like NTPC are using unbundling practices, that growing solar to bring down the cost of thermal. And I remember in the International Solar Alliance, if you look at the pricing that we talk about, initially we talked in the ministry way back in 2004, we were talking about grid parity. Everyone would say, look, how do you meet grid parity? We met, and then we talked about kerosene parity, saying that you may have grid parity, but where is the purchasing power of the people all over the country? How do they buy it? You must bring down to kerosene parity, which means you spend as much as you spend in kerosene. And today in ISA, we are talking about near zero cost. And if you find the Indian experiment, and globally that is the trend, in Indian currency, it is 2 rupees per unit. And this price is very peculiar. Unlike in any market, this is fixed for 20 years, 30 years. Now, if you deflate this price at 4%, you have almost reached zero, near zero cost. And now, still then, we identified that there are 3 areas of darkness in this 21st century when we are talking about a 78 trillion world economy. Now, one area of darkness is 3 billion people who have no access to clean drinking water. And the second area of darkness is again gender-based. 2 billion women have no access to clean cooking medium. And the third area of darkness is 750 million people who have, of course, no light in the house. Now, the One Sun, One World, One Grid, when the Prime Minister Modi announced, he always thinks big, dreams big, which is a very good thing, and that is how leaders move. In 2018, and wanted ISA to be the OPEC of solar. It took us by surprise. We're thinking, what exactly, is this idea? Because everybody had in mind at some point in the past, we all come to have a, sort of one grid. And so essentially, those 3 areas of darkness are linked to this big concept of one sun, one world, one grid. The 3 billion women, the 2 billion women, the 3 billion people who have no access, and the 750 million who are supposed to have energy access by 2030, and the World Bank has just said that it can't have. Now, if you look at One Sun, One World, or One Road, in fact, the Australian company, I was having an interaction with them. I said, look, so many people are skeptical. And how do you plan? And they told me they were planning for 7,500 kilometers of transmission. 3,500 kilometers of that was marine subsea cables. And they were looking at classical economics model, the issue of land, the issue of labor, the issue of capital, and the issue of technology. And so our idea of one sun, one world, one grid is going to address these issues in a global platform. And that is where I congratulate EDF have taken this leadership role. And thankful to World Bank and MNRE and State Bank of India who have come forward and further to work with ISA. Now, when we talk about land, in fact, I'm happy the Bangladesh issue, it is not merely Bangladesh issue. There are many countries who have a policy of food security. The good land cannot be used for solar. There are countries, of course, in the north where the sunlight is not plenty and it doesn't come year round. There are areas where the atmosphere being full of dust doesn't permit the maximum efficiency in solar. So this company is taking all those issues into account. So far, there are 7,500 kilometers are concerned. In Singapore, of course, they found that the energy cost was very high. Even transmission via Indonesia, some island, loading and type of transmission they're planning, still they find it is cheaper to transmit energy from the deserts of Australia to Singapore. And that is only one part. I mean, there are various things that can be addressed. So when the ISA's vision of one sun, one world, one grid, of course, some may say it needs a supercomputer to bring in the type of data we need, the type to manage a global system like this. But essentially, it will address these three areas of darkness and through three mechanisms. One mechanism is we have to develop a world grid code. It will take, like any national grid code, we need a complex grid code to be negotiated. That will address technological challenges. I'm not going into details. Second, we need a power sharing agreement, the geopolitical risk, the peak hour, the down peak hour. And if you're talking about ISA being opaque, when energy is free and the storage will be, solar based, you'll find that everybody would like to produce. And we don't want a grid to, collapse. So how do you manage this hundreds of cities with the peak hour, with the non-peak hour? Of course, you need a supercomputer, and that's not difficult. And the third component is a World Solar Bank, because those three areas of darkness have been there. In fact, in some cases, they're getting aggravated. So the idea of a World Solar Bank is to create a bank, of which I'm very happy to say that, in fact, the Honourable Minister from UK said that they will be helping us to have a DPR, Detailed Project Report. And the ISA Assembly, in the last session, have formed a steering committee for this purpose to bring the framework agreement to discuss, how it can actually have a loan portfolio of 100 billion. And we're also exploring whether it can be a joint sector bank, a little bit of deviation from multilateral bank. But this is a way to de-risk the capital that can be earmarked for the solar sector. And I'm sure that all these ideas are going into the feasibility report that we are planning to get prepared through EDF and TERI. And in the next assembly, of course, the interim report will come, and maybe COP21 was famous for launching International Solar Alliance, and I'm sure UK will compete to make COP26 memorable. One way to make it memorable is to launch the World Solar Bank. But of course, that needs a lot of work, a lot of resolve, and I'm sure the world is moving in a better direction to make sure that those dark areas have definite supply of capital to address those issues of land, labor, capital, and technology when we are talking about a global project like One Sun, One World, One Grid. Once again, thank you everyone, particularly Terry, for having given me this opportunity. And a month down, I welcome Ajay to sit down here and participate in different things, because he is going to be my successor. And I can tell that because although we have the election to 15, he's the only candidate now. So welcome to him also. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Juhi, so let me thank both Adair and Upendra Tripathi for sharing their thoughts with us. We now move into the panel discussion, and let me hand it over to you, Jui, and to Anshu for the next part of this session.
Thank you, sir. So, as it was already announced, the session is being chaired by Dr. Anshu Bhardwaj, CEO of Shakti Sustainable Energy Foundation. And without further ado, I'd like to call him on.
Thank you, Juhi, and thank you, sir, for the invite to chair this session. It's an honor for me to be moderating this very prestigious and very relevant topic, and I'm really excited to be part of this. We have a very distinguished panel in this discussion, which brings together people from various backgrounds and expertise. We have Ambassador of France, His Excellency Stéphane Crozat, Mr. Amit Jain, who is a Senior Energy Specialist of the World Bank, Mr. Philip Leinhardt, who is the EDF Project Lead for OSOWOG program. Mr. Jayant Parimal has not joined yet. He is listed on the panel, but he is not there yet. And of course, we have Lord Adair Turner, who is Chairman of the ETC. So welcome, colleagues, to this panel discussion, and I look forward to hearing your comments. I'll just set the context by a minute of opening remarks, just to add to what Lord Turner and Mr. Upinder Tripathi said. Just drawing from high school physics, it's and throwing some numbers from there. The solar presents an enormous opportunity. It's a no-brainer, and we all know that the solar energy which falls on the earth in 1 hour is more than what the globe consumes in entire year. So that's one statistic which I have, over the years always reminded myself. It's a very compelling statistic that solar energy falling on the earth in 1 hour is sufficient to meet global demand for the full year. Plants use it, and at an efficiency of less than 1%. The efficiency of photosynthesis is of the order of 0.1 or less than that, 0.1 to 0.3%. That's the efficiency of conversion of solar energy into a biomass through a leaf. So if you will, the efficiency of a leaf is 0.1 to 0.2%. And today we have solar cells which can do that for at least 15% or maybe 20%. So we have technology which is much, much more efficient than natural photosynthesis. The other statistic I've been struck with is the fact that global electricity demand can be met by an area equivalent to a square of about 400 by 400 kilometers. That's all we need to meet the global electricity demand. Now you can have that area in various ways. It could be one centralized large area or distributed across the globe, as Dr. Mathur mentioned in his remarks. So the questions are, how do we go about it? Should we have a more of a centralized model of building these giant solar plants, or a distributed model which spreading across the globe? The natural photosynthesis obviously mimics the latter. It's a highly decentralized model of capturing solar energy across the globe. There are plenty of issues which have been highlighted. I think the 5 which stand out in my opinion. One is, of course, the context of the COVID and the recovery that we are right now. The global economy is recovering from a deep recession, and how do we contextualize solar in that background? The other issue is international cooperation, especially between countries who have a hostile history, especially given that we'll be transmitting power from one country to another. Various countries have already implemented solar projects in the last 10, 15, 20 years. How do we make sure that those countries and their learnings are brought to the table and we add from them? There are also large experiments in electric vehicles, hydrogen. How can that be made part of the narrative and made sure that solar energy generation for future takes into account these potential end-use applications? And finally, what really are the motivations for various countries? what are the cost benefits? What are the social impacts on countries whose lands will be used? How do the local people benefit from these kind of investments? The issues of equity and parity. So it's a whole bunch of issues. This session obviously can only touch upon some of them in the time that we have, but I'm really happy that ISA is taking this initiative forward and Terry is embarking on this very important study. This Terry's output will, I'm sure, throw a lot of light on many of these issues to come. So I'll get along with the session now. I did notice that we started about 15 minutes late. So in the interest of time, I'll request my panelists to restrict their remarks to 6 to 7 minutes, let's say 7 minutes. I'll send you a reminder 1 minute in advance so that we can wrap up in time. And then we'll have maybe 10 minutes of Q&A and hoping that we can still wrap up by 5:15. So can I request Ambassador of France, His Excellency Stephen Crozat, to share his opening remarks. And if you could, throw some light on the aspect of net zero, which France has been championing, the global economy, the impact of COVID, that should be great to set the context. Over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Anshu. Delighted to be part of this session, very important session, because solar energy is really the energy of the future. And we heard the remarkable goal that Prime Minister Modi has set for 2030 of 450 gigawatts of renewable energy at the last Climate Ambition Summit last December, the summit that we organized along with the UK and the UN to try and boost the ambition in the run-up to COP26, and we were delighted that India could participate and make such an important announcement. It's so important because solar energy has become huge. Almost 600 gigawatts of solar energy have been installed across the world, and the momentum is accelerating. We remember how the IEA has described solar energy as the king of renewable energy, in the words of Fatih Birol. And as Lord Turner reminded us, the cost of solar has gone down by 90% in the last decades. We have to remember what the cost of solar energy was in the 50s, when it was only applicable to going up in the space for satellites, and now it has seeped into everybody's lives. France and India have launched the Solar Alliance, the International Solar Alliance. We launched it along with our Indian friends during COP21, and we're really very proud to be part of this initial input to really spearhead solar energy throughout the world. Now, the One Sun, One World, One Grid vision is really an extremely ambitious project in terms of electrical infrastructure, aiming at interconnecting power grids beyond borders to harness the power of the sun. And support for developing the regional integration of electrical interconnections offers several advantages: the economies of scales, enhanced grid reliability, the ability to share energy resources with countries lacking them, increase capacities to integrate renewable energies, and tackle the issue of intermittency. And I'd just like to point out perhaps the European experience, because as you know, we're really set in Europe in any case, and around the world, as Dr. Turner was saying, to use much more electricity around the world, and in Europe in particular. And just to give you a point here, is the development of electric vehicles. There's a huge momentum in Europe about electric vehicles, a 200% rise in 2020 of sales in electric vehicles, and it's really set to really set off. In several European countries, such as France, have decided to ban fossil fuel powered vehicles by a certain date, and France, it's by 2040, and some other European countries have decided to do it even beforehand. There's also the development of hydrogen, which Lord Turner mentioned. France has developed a plan of 700 billion euro plan to develop green hydrogen with the electrolysis of water, and that will need a huge amount of electricity. And for all this, we really need interconnections, and that's where OSOWOG is so, is so visionary. And in Europe, we realized that early on with the drive to try and have a 10% interconnection links between all the countries, i.e. every country should be able by 2020, and we reached that goal to export 10% of its electricity in order to be able to have a very efficient grid in Europe. And in order to do that, we have several techniques, and one of them is the one that also Lord Turner mentioned, is underground or underwater cables. And in my previous job, I was interested particularly in the Celtic interconnector, a 500 kilometer electric cable underground, 700 megawatts, that will link Brittany to the island of Ireland. And it's particularly relevant to our subject because this interconnector, which should, it's not cheap, it's a 1 billion euro project, it will allow, once it's set up in 2026, to really boost renewable energies, both in Ireland and in France, because it will allow for these renewable energies to be exported when there's too much wind, for instance, or sun. Sometimes it does happen in Ireland and in Brittany, too much sun shining on the solar panels. So there is really, we see an incredible scope for progress and potential achievement, and we're delighted to be part of the OSOWOG project. France will be much involved in the reflection on pushing this idea, and I want to congratulate the consortium composed of EDF, and we have a representative will be talking about it, Terry, also French consulting agency AETS for their selection by the Ministry for New and Renewable Energy, ISA, and also the World Bank to prepare a feasibility study for the development of this very, very important project. So we're looking very much forward to seeing the results of this study on how to implement it. So thank you very much. Back to you, Anshu.
Thank you, Stefan, and thank you for giving me 1 minute extra and finishing within your time. May I now request Mr. Amit Jain, a Senior Energy Specialist at the World Bank, to share his views, please.
Thank you very much, Anshu, for having me on the panel. Now, first, let me be honest to DG Tripathi, Dr. Mathur, and Stefan, that the One Sun, One World, One Grid initiative has divided the energy experts globally. So there are energy experts who completely outrightly reject this idea, and there are experts like me and DG Tripathi who would like to push and go ahead with this project. And I see that, Anshu, that Dr. Mathur has very carefully selected the panelists who are pro One Sun, One World initiative. So, so we are going to get a lot of feedback that this is a great initiative and we should move forward. But I would like to place this on the table that there are a lot of question marks being asked on this initiative, and some of these questions are valid, and I will try to discuss some of these questions in this initiative. First, I want to clear one misconception that the One Sun, One World initiative is about global grid, but it does not mean that we are trying to connect the whole world with one grid. That's not what we are talking about. What we are talking about is interconnectors. Interconnectors between Gujarat and Oman with Gulf, interconnectors between India and Bangladesh to Myanmar to Vietnam to Southeast Asia, interconnectors to Africa via Gulf, right? Now, this has already happened in Europe, where there are interconnectors between different countries. This is also being planned between Australia and Singapore. So this is a technology, this is a concept which exists, and HVDC lines, both over the land and undersea cables, have now existed for decades. No? So from a technology point of view, this has existed for some time. So the global grid is about interconnectors between different countries and different continents. It's not about having one grid from Delhi all the way to London and New York and passing electrons from one city to another. That's not what it's about. Secondly, when in 2010 and 11, uh, when Gujarat launched the Charanka Solar Park, they signed PPAs of 15 rupees per unit. Similar questions were being asked if solar or renewable energy are commercially and technically feasible, and are we signing these expensive PPAs and we are putting discoms in trouble? But now that is history. And DG Tripathi was Secretary MNRE a couple of years later, when few expensive solar plants in Gujarat kick-started the solar revolution in India, and now we are debating if 2 rupees is the right price for solar in India. So what I'm trying to say is few honest visionary decisions 10 years back, first by Gujarat government and then also by the central government with National Solar Mission, with a very innovative concept of reverse auction, silenced all the critics and drove the prices not only for India, but globally, which is now driving renewables prices down. Today, we don't have even a single session, Anshu, where we discuss whether solar or renewable energy is technically or commercially feasible. So today, the visionary step being taken by Government of India, International Solar Alliance, is towards this direction. We are not saying that the global grid or the interconnectors are going to be technically and commercially viable. What we are saying over here is we have hired EDF as one of the largest utility in the whole world to come out with a vision and roadmap document, to come out with a pre-feasibility study. Is it technically and commercially possible to connect India with Gulf and Southeast Asia and so on, right? So this is the first step in this direction. There is no claim, there is no hypothesis. This is only the first step to come out with a vision and a roadmap. Are we moving in the right direction? Is it possible 2 years, 5 years down the line to have this? And why we are doing this? You can take any country, Anshu, but let's take India, for example. The way we are moving, Gujarat and Rajasthan naturally have thousands of hectares of desert land. Today itself, we have 15 gigawatts of wind and solar in Gujarat and Rajasthan. In the next 4 to 5 years, if the current plan of Indian government goes ahead, we will have 30 to 50 gigawatts of solar and wind only in these two states. And we are left with 2 or 3 options. Either we take this power to Delhi or to Maharashtra, because these 2 states cannot absorb this power. Only demand centers like Delhi and Maharashtra could absorb this power. What we are putting on the table for the One Sun initiative, can we also explore an undersea cable to the Gulf? And is it possible to transmit power from these 2 states to Middle East and also back? Because there is a 4-hour time lag between these 2 countries, right? This is what we are trying to explore through this initiative. Now, why we are doing this? Anshu, if you see that there is an example in front of us in California, where California has become the world landmark in terms of environment-friendly policies. But even over there, 20%, and I'm not talking about by capacity, I'm talking about by penetration, by megawatt hours, is by solar and wind. But because they don't have a streamlined or a clear interconnectors.
One minute left.
Interconnectors with the other states, there is a lot of curtailment happening within California. This is what we want to avoid in India and other countries, the curtailment, when the renewable energy penetrations go beyond 15 to 25%. This is what is not happening in Europe as part of the supergrid, because the solar in Spain is getting transferred to north where you have more hydro is getting transferred to west, where because of Atlantic winds, we have more wind. So this is how Europe has done in form of a in form of a super grid. And this is what we are trying to see if this is possible in globally through this form of interconnectors. So in terms of timelines, EDF is now being hired. We expect that the vision and the roadmap document should be ready by July or August if we go ahead with the planning. And then Lord Adair is over here. The plan is to launch this study at COP, the vision and roadmap document, with at least one pilot on the table. The pilot could be with Southeast Asia or with Gulf. That's the plan, to have some concrete results, at least for one pilot, to showcase that this could be a reality. Thanks, Anshu.
Thank you, Amit. That was really nice. And I thank you for also highlighting the other side of the story, especially the opposition and the reservation which various, obviously, the energy industry would have. It's important to flag that and understand the challenges which this might have going ahead. So thank you for providing a very objective and balanced approach to this project. So, that gives a very nice segue to head over to the next speaker, Mr. Philip Reinhardt. Philip, you are the one who perhaps will have answer to all the issues which Amit raised. And everybody, I'm sure, is looking forward to you to tell us what OSOWOG is all about. So over to you.
So thank you very much, first of all, for Terry's invitation to the WSDS. And good afternoon. I am Philippe Reinhardt, like you said. I am an engineer, and my skill is electrical transmission, electrical system, and electrical markets. For 39 years now, as manager and expert, and I'm also a fellow expert in EDF, and I'm the team leader of the One Sun, One World, One Grid project for ISA and MNRE, financed by World Bank. So I have prepared some slides. Maybe I should show you these slides, and I will present you what we are about to do for this project. And let me some seconds. Can you see the slides?
Yes, we can see them. Yeah.
Is it better now?
Yeah, okay. If you could put them on presentation mode, yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Sorry? It's okay? Good.
Yep.
First of all, I would like to say that I'm working for EDF, worldwide utility with head office in France, and with a low carbon strategy based on nuclear and renewable energies. Just an example, EDF is only 55 grams of CO2 for each kilowatt hours, while the global average is 500 grams. So the OSOWOG project is a roadmap for the interconnection of renewable energies, solar, of course, but also wind power and hydropower. This project is handled by a consortium led by EDF, with AETS, a skill and dynamic consultancy, Dynamic, and Terry, well, you know Terry, the prestigious Indian organization expert in energy and in environment and resources. This project is for ISA and MNRE, and you know that International Solar Alliance was co-founded by India and France at the COP21, and has today 120 member countries. And the project is also for the Ministry of New Renewable Energies, MNRE. So my presentation will be short, only a few slides. The summary is first, the goal of OSOWOG project and the stakes for ISA MNRE. 2 slides on the lesson learned from the consortium experiences, 2 examples, one in Europe and one in Northeast Asia, and my experience about the benefits brought by the interconnection, and a conclusion. The goal of OSOWOG project and the stake for ISA MNRE. The context is that the global electricity consumption is growing fast due to more industrial development, but also in many countries to new access to electricity for one part of the population. In many countries of the region, there is also the difficulty to provide power at each hour of the day, and when people request access to electricity. Nowadays, the main issue is that 2/3 of the global electricity of the world comes from fossil fuels, causing an unacceptable increase of CO2 emission in regard with the Paris Agreement on climate change. The replacement by renewable energies is a solution as soon as possible, but it is challenging for the authorities and utilities. In India, there is a strong political will. I quote the Prime Minister Narendra Modi stating, "The International Solar Alliance is launched with the motive to unite the entire world in terms of solar energy, and the spirit behind was one sun, one world, one grid." An international solar alliance is the place where the consensus is being built among the countries for accelerating the changes. And the question is how to meet such demand, further to develop the access to major renewable energy sources and achieve these goals of sustainable social and economic development. One answer to this question is the One Sun, One World, One Grid project. Just one slide on the different challenges of the project. First, find the optimal grid for connecting renewable energies with the load. Second, use the interconnection as a solution for solving the problem of the intermittency of the renewable energies. Keeping the light on is maintaining the grid safety. That means avoiding the blackouts as the systems get more complex to operate. And organize correctly the economy of power exchange. In many regions of the world, you can find initiatives for interconnecting the systems. I have no time for detailing, but we can talk about it after. We participated to many studies, and I will only talk about 2 experiences in Europe and in Northeast Asia. Let's take a first example in the European interconnection. First of all, it's a long story that started just after the World War II. Phase 1, it started with an agreement between several countries, and the objective at that time was to organize the exchange of electricity with the goal of improving the safety of the national systems and optimize the cost of reserve. The second phase started 20 years ago with the European electricity market and the organization of the competition between generation companies.
Philip, you have a minute left?
Yes.
You have a minute left.
Sorry?
Just reminding about the time, we have a minute left.
Yes. And short after 2000, the new energy policies was launched for CO2 emission reductions. This is a slide on a recent study for ADB that is called Strategy for Northeast Asia Power System Interconnection. This region is 25% of the world GDP, while it is 40% of global CO2 emission. In Northeast Asia, Mongolia is a large country with a small population, not a rich country, while the other countries are rich. Mongolia has an enormous potential in wind and solar. You can see the impressive figures of 1,200 gigawatts for solar and 200 gigawatts for wind. And we have studied 3 scenarios of exportation of renewable energies from Mongolia to Russia, China, Korea, and Japan, 5 gigawatts, 10 gigawatts, and 100 gigawatts. And it works. I mean the interconnection is feasible at reasonable cost, and it will, and with the implementation of a regional electricity market, solar and wind power from Mongolia will replace fossil-fired electricity in Northeast Asia, helping for cutting the regional CO2 emission of the region. Now the conclusions of our study are clear regarding the benefit brought by the interconnection. Electricity exchanges cause price reduction. Interconnection brings the necessary flexibility required for compensating the intermittency of the renewable energies. Interconnection improves system safety. Clear cheap solar and wind power will replace fossil fuel power plants and will help for cutting CO2 emission. All these benefits are provided a strong coordination between the regulators and ministries of energy of the countries, and provided also the creation of a common platform body where all the countries are represented and work together. The conclusion of my presentation: the project will deal with renewable energy potential and possibility of power exchange among countries of the region, with necessary corridors for exchange power, and with a set of recommendations for the necessary institutional, regulatory, and market evolutions. We will take into consideration the countries close to India first, and then in the Far East, and after toward Far West, I mean Central Asia, Middle East, and even Africa. It will be short, medium, and long term, 2030, 2040, long term, 2050. All fields of activities will be studied: technical, economic and financial, regulatory, and organization. We will keep in mind that this project is for CO2 emission reduction, but also at the same level of importance for helping people to get access at clean and affordable electricity. Namaste for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you for a very interesting presentation and for providing the nuts and bolts of how this is likely to work out. The example which you gave of a few countries for transferring power, solar and wind to replace fossil, I think that gives a sense of the possibilities which exist in other countries to emulate. May I now request Lord Turner to take forward and talk more about building upon what you mentioned in the beginning about what is it in these countries to go for this? Is it just the love for climate change, love for solar, or what economic benefits are the likely drivers for these countries to be part of this initiative? If you could shed some light, it will be very helpful to the discourse.
Well, look, I'm not going to make new introductory remarks because I've done that before, but let me respond to this particular question. I do think it's important that we deal with climate change, and we have a global problem here, a problem actually whose severity of effect could be worse in India than in almost any other country in the world. If you look at the climate models, climate change is a bigger threat to some countries closer to the equator, existing hotter countries, countries dependent on the flow of water from the Himalayan glaciers. And of course, we've seen this terrible tragedy of this collapsing glacier, which may itself be a product of climate change. So I do think it's important for us to realize we need as a world a plan to deal with climate change and to get to net zero. The good news, however, is that I think, and this is the big change of the last 10 years, that the reductions in the cost of renewable electricity in particular wind and solar, have been so dramatic that the cost of achieving that is really very small. Indeed, it is possible that it will turn out to be nil. Let me give you an example. When Nick Stern did the Economics of Climate Change report in 2005, he worked out that for the world to get to net zero, to reduce emissions by about 50% by 2050, only 50% on path to zero by 2070 or 80, that would cost the global economy 1 to 1.5% of GDP. When we did the calculations on the UK Climate Change Committee in 2008 of how much it would cost us to get UK emissions down 80% by 2050, we calculated about 1 to 1.5% of GDP. And when the same Climate Change Committee worked out in its latest report what it now thinks it will cost for the UK to get a 100% reduction by 2050, the answer is now 0.5% of GDP. We have been slowly increasing the level of ambition, and with the same technique of analysis, ending up with far, far, far lower costs of getting there. And this is fantastic news for the world, because it means that we can set out to build a zero carbon economies at close to no net cost to our economies. And therefore, this is not at all about preventing growth. Let me reiterate what I said earlier. The ETC vision for India is a country which by 2050 will be consuming 6 times as much electricity as it does at the moment, providing electricity to all the villages that don't have it, driving the electrification of vehicles, etc. So I think that it's actually really rather important that we, yes, recognize that we have a climate change problem, but now recognize that in clean electricity, we have a wonderful technology, which is a win-win for our societies. And we've got to create that sense of excitement in business, among consumers, about just how attractive and how prosperous our societies could be if we drive the technology. But let me within that pick up a point that Amit Jain made earlier. We would not be now in the position where solar was the cheapest way of producing electricity, and with the idea that the target price in India should be about 2 rupees per kilowatt hour. We would not be there if back in 2000, Germany had not been paying Bavarian farmers about 50 US cents per kilowatt hour to put solar PV panels on the roofs of their farms. You needed that initial subsidy, and then you needed what Amit described, those initial subsidies and what looked like very expensive deals in Gujarat 10 years ago to drive these technologies to the scale where the cost comes down and the subsidy is no longer required. We've achieved that with solar. We've achieved that with wind. We're achieving that with batteries. Next thing we have to achieve that with is electrolyzers and the production of hydrogen. But we should take from the last 10 to 15 years a really great confidence that when you set stretching targets and when you do initial subsidies for new technologies, you can then achieve technological breakthroughs and cost reductions which really astound people. So I think we need that overall confidence about the costs of electrification and the benefits of electrification and benefits of clean electrification. And then we need to see OSOWOG within that as an enabling device to deal, as I said, with these 2 problems: high population density countries, which will have to be importers of energy, but in a new clean form, and crucially, managing this balance problem of how do we improve the balance of our systems, where it's very straightforward. And Amit's absolutely right. We're not talking about one completely integrated grid. It's a set of interconnectors, which mean that you can balance the different mixes of supply and demand which are emerging in different grids. In Europe, in the UK, we now have new links being built over to Norway to tap into the Norwegian hydro resource. But I think this has a major opportunity, but we should see it as a positive story about green prosperity, as well as being an answer to climate change.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that was very. So your argument is that given the current costs of solar and the fact that it is today much cheaper than other sources of energy, there is a very strong economic case for taking this forward in the various countries and to meet their requirements, considering land issues and other constraints. So I come to the end of the remarks by panelists. Juhi, I notice we are exactly at 5:15. If it is okay, can we have maybe 5 minutes of Q&A or will it be conflicting with the next session?
I think we're already late on the sessions, so I would request you to sum up and conclude.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry.
Okay, great. So yeah, this has been a fascinating discussion, and at a personal level, great learning for me, and I'm sure for the audience who's watching this session. It's a very novel topic, and not much is there in the public domain yet, because the project is just starting. So when people talk about it, there are several questions about what it is all about, how will it happen, and therefore this particular discussion has been fantastic. We had a great panel who touched upon various aspects of the project. What would be the benefits? How will it unfold? And great learning for me, and I'm sure for the people who are watching this. One thing which I take away, which is a very important takeaway, is that the impression the title gives is that, well, there will be one grid which will be connecting the entire globe. So are we creating a sort of a global electricity market? From what we heard, it appears that's not the case. There will be more of regional conglomerates of identifying zones or regions where this makes sense, economic sense to develop those corridors. And we had a discussion, short overview of that by Philip. We also heard that there is a great economics argument for countries to go for this because solar being so cheap, if countries are densely populated where land is a premium, for example, Bangladesh or even eastern parts of India, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, etc., it makes more sense to talk about a model where clean energy can be shipped across. And even though this is one sun, one world, we are talking about solar plus wind plus other RE, a whole bunch of clean energy options. So, we can go on discussing forever, but in the interest of time, I will have to call this session to a close. I sincerely thank my fellow panelists for a very rich discussion and for sharing their perspectives. And we look forward to the progress, and we hope to see the results and reports when they're out in the public. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and back to you, sir, for the next session.
Thank you, Dr. Bhardwaj, for conducting the session. We're grateful for this opportunity to have heard from some of the leading experts in the field of solar power and energy transition. Thank you all for joining us.